All right, it's great to be here. My name is Leo Hochberg. I'm the youth correspondent for Make It Fair, coming to you from Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. I have with me here today Kopano Muhammad. They are an activist and an artist from Chicago and a current student here at Oberlin.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on the show. So, recently there's been a lot of talk in the news lately about police violence as well as other forms of violence. I'm sure you've all heard of the Parkland teens who have been going around the country raising awareness and talking to congressional members about new gun laws that are necessary to make our schools safer. However, there are plenty of narratives that have been often getting left out of the mainstream. For example, students of color at Parkland have recently held their own press conference to talk about the ways in which their narratives have been left out of most media outlets and how they don't want to detract from their peers, but they feel as though talking about police violence and other forms of violence that are particularly affecting communities of color aren't talked about enough when we're talking about guns. So I have Kopano here with me today to talk about this and their own perspective on gun violence. So Kopano, can you talk to us about your background, where you're from, any personal perspectives on how people of color are affected by gun violence differently than white people, and how the mainstream may be overlooking this in the narrative about gun violence?
Definitely. So I grew up on Chicago, the south side of Chicago. I grew up in South Shore, which is not a particularly safe neighborhood. There is a lot of gun violence that occurs in South Shore and really just in Chicago in general. And the south and west sides, where most of that gun violence occurs, are predominantly black and brown neighborhoods. So I have found it very frustrating recently when I think about organizations such as Asada's Daughters or the I Project or other organizations that counter gun violence through education and through activism do not have the spotlight or the media attention that white activists are able to gain. And and it's really interesting when people talk about gun violence in black and brown communities, because they always talk about black on black crime, and it deters me so much when people talk about black on black crime as black on black crime, because that insinuates that black people are killing black people for being black.
Right.
And that is not the problem at all. What is the problem is that in cities such as Chicago, mayors like Mayor Rahm Emanuel are closing high schools and elementary schools in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods, therefore disallowing students to even get an education, or making it even harder for students to obtain an education by physically removing it from their neighborhoods. So then that increases, you have to think about transportation costs, you have to think about time costs, you have to think about the roles that these children play in their family, and if they even have, if attending school is a possibility for them. So, I think that's about it.
That's obviously an enormous issue. And so what do you think the role of education has in deterring gun violence, particularly with relationship to the police that are active in these black and brown communities, and in what way is it necessary to improve that system of education in order to route these problems?
When I think about education and gun violence and the police, I think about two different scopes. I think about the way that police are educated in handling black and brown people.
Right.
There are definitely, police were initially created to capture runaway slaves.
Right.
And that was their first mission when they were created. It is very difficult to take that out of an institution when that was its mantra, was that, we are here to catch runaway slaves. And I think the racist mentality of police needs to be uneducated.
Right.
Because it's not only taught in police academies. I'm not saying I've never been to a police academy, but definitely I was reading a police report, and there was a superintendent who was encouraging his officers to target black and brown children who for hopping turnstiles in New York City.
Wow.
And it's that encouragement it encourages racism. That's what it is. That's what it's doing, is encouraging racism.
It's incredibly hard to root out that kind of history.
Exactly. So I think there needs to be that active anti-racism being taught, as to not target communities of color. Then on the flip side, I think that, like I talked about schools being closed, I think there needs to be more funding for schools on the south and west sides of Chicago. And that education the reason that people don't turn to gun violence for fun. You know, people don't join gangs for fun.
Absolutely.
It is a lack of education, a lack of representation of seeing that what one is possible of achieving, that turns people to gun violence. It's very difficult when you live in a community that is ridden by social issues that did not start when you were born, but were alive before you even thought of.
Right.
It's very difficult to get yourself out of that mindset, and school is an opportunity and should be an opportunity for children to leave what may not be the safest place for them, and then have a haven to learn, to
Absolutely.
educate themselves, to educate their peers. And without that opportunity to exit an unsafe space, what do people expect for others to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, it must be immense to not only be stuck in the system of, like, recurring educational failures, but to, like, meanwhile carry all of that history on your shoulders. And so, like, given that, like, what particular role do you think that guns have specifically in our educational system as it is? And, like, I've heard plenty on the news about, like, guns being used in school checks to root out drugs, and how that, like, enormously targets students of color. And so how do the guns and the police themselves and the militarization of the police play a role in, like, suppressing these students and enforcing negative stereotypes about education?
Well, it's inducing fear into students. Like, if you're, I know when I was growing up, whenever we would walk by police or see police officers, my parents like, be still, you know, don't do anything. So I've never felt safe around police officers.
Right.
Versus when I talk to a lot of my white friends, they're like, call the police. Like, there's an alien. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable calling the police because I don't know what's gonna happen to me. So when I go to school, and even if I'm not guilty of anything, but that disrupts the peace, that disrupts the safety of school.
Right.
Is this immediate criminalization of Black and brown students, and this immediate, like, oh no, like, police officers have to be in schools. Like, we can't trust students. We can't trust students to handle their own, or we can't trust students to, I guess, be safe. I mean, I don't think that police should play any role, or guns should have any place in education.
Absolutely.
I think it's very counterintuitive, and it's very dangerous. The only things that guns are associated with is death. So yeah. I don't understand what are the positives of that. I mean, we recently just heard about how a teacher, I believe in California, accidentally fired, whose gun accidentally went off and injured a student. Yeah,
that could have killed someone.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't understand how guns, which are so risky, like, you know, like, you don't know whose hands, like, who is handling these guns. You don't know their history. You don't know what personal vendettas they may have.
Right. Yeah, and not only that, but, like, how can you possibly train an entire corps of teachers who have no experience handling guns to even bring that into a classroom that they've considered gun-free for years and years?
And even when you have, like, security officers who are supposed to protect children are running away from situations that they should be breaking apart, you know?
Right.
Like, in the Parkland shooting, we saw, like, security officers did not intervene. So I don't think that there has been any evidence that guns are helpful.
Right.
In any educational facility or setting.
Absolutely. So moving forward into the future, as, like, there's all of this talk in the news lately about gun violence, about legislation, what do you think are the most effective steps that can be taken to help secure a safer space, particularly for Black and brown students in their schools, and for Black and brown communities in general?
I think that restorative justice practices should definitely be instilled in elementary and high school spaces. I think that, I mean,
can you talk a little bit as well about, like, what restorative justice is and, like, what it means to you?
So restorative justice, what it means to me and what I've learned about it is that you think about, there's kind of like there's three stakeholders. There's the victim, there's the offender, and there's the community.
Right.
So the criminal justice system aims to punish the criminal, and then that's it. It
Right.
does not rehabilitate the harm done to the victim or to the community. So restorative justice aims to elevate the needs of the victim and then encourage the offender to meet those needs and hold them accountable.
Right.
And also include the community as to see what cultivated this incident for it to take place.
Right.
What can the community do to also help the victim and also rehabilitate the offender.
Absolutely.
You know, like one of the leading cause of violence and people lashing out is ostracization. So when someone commits an offense and then are even more ostracized, is that really helping deter or lower the frequency of said actions? So I think that restorative justice is really important to implement in elementary and high schools, because these are children. These are
Right.
these are young people
Yeah.
who are learning and making mistakes, and you know, we never know what's happening at home. You know, the criminal justice system doesn't take into consideration one's psychological well-being when it comes to Black and brown children.
Right.
It doesn't take into consideration one's socioeconomic status, what they may have witnessed in their life, what is happening to them immediately. And that and restorative justice aims to say, like, you know, like, where is this anger coming from? Where is this hatred coming from? Why are you hurt? And why are you lashing out? It asks the root of one's actions rather than just condemning one for said actions.
Absolutely.
So I think that teaching children, you know, forgiveness, teaching them, giving the opportunity to understand the consequences of their actions, how it impacts those around them, not just who they may have hurt, but also the community. I think that's a beautiful thing to instill in people while they're young, so that not only does it happen in the classroom, but it goes beyond the classroom. You take what you learn in the classroom and you apply it to your everyday living.
Absolutely. All right, Kopano, thank you so much for being with us on Make It Fair. Do you have anything that you want to boost to an audience, your own music, your own projects?
Oh, yeah, sure. If you want to hear any of my music or you want to view any of my art, you can find me at kopano art.com. That's Kopano Art. I would also strongly encourage for people who would like to contribute money to for people who would like to help raise funds for a predominantly Black school on the South Side called Boucher. My friend Eva Lewis, who's a dear friend of mine, has a nonprofit called the I Project, and the I Project currently has a mission called Education Emancipation, which talks about the freedom to learn, and they're currently trying to raise money for every student at Boucher Elementary to have a laptop, which is something that students from the north side of school have. Like, I went to a high school on the north side, and we had all these facilities, all these materials that students at Boucher or like Hyde Park Academy, which is a south side high school, do not have.
Right.
So if you would like to learn more about that initiative, you can go to It's the I Project, you know, Google it, and there is a GoFundMe, a campaign for you to donate there.
All right, thank you so much, Kopano. This has been Leo Hochberg, youth correspondent on Make It Fair, and have a great day.
And she smiled a golden smile that could be seen for miles and years to come. But yes, we're swinging low. My sweet love carried me on a road to our kingdom, singing daddy.